Hello, everyone, and welcome to Beginnings, the show that asks, where do creative people come from? My name is Andy. I'm the host of the show and a writer and performer based in Los Angeles, California, and as usual, I have neglected to do this intro until right before the episode drops, almost midnight on Thursday, so I will keep this intro quick, because you know what? I got very tired. I want to go lie on the couch with the animals, watch an episode of From, but I didn't want to neglect this episode because it was a real delight. Today is Ed Herro. If you don't know who Ed is, I'm going to read you his bio right now. Originally from Madison, Wisconsin, TV writer Ed Herro fell in love with improv in middle school. He started doing comedy in college for real and moved to New York, where he performed on house teams in the early days of UCB. Eventually realizing that one could not make a living yes-anding, he became a touring stand-up and then a TV writer, writing on shows like Jeff and Some Aliens, American Housewife, and The Neighbors. Most recently, he created, with his writing partner Brian Donovan, the series The Sticky, starring the incredible Margot Martindale, and it is airing now weekly on Amazon Prime. So I had not really heard of Ed, but his publicist contacted me. They're doing press for The Sticky, and honestly, I don't think Margot Martindale has been in anything bad ever. So I was like, you know what? Let's roll the dice. Usually I talk to people on the show whose work has affected me, either my own path or emotionally affects me. But every once in a while, I will roll the dice. And I would say 99% of the time, I'm glad I did. This is quite interesting. And I will say I was 100% thrown for a loop about halfway through. I mean, it's not a huge revelation, so I'll just say it here, but Ed was there in the early days of UCB. When I got there and fell in love with improv, because first when I heard improv, I was like, what, whose line is it anyway? Great. And when I started taking classes at UCB, it was mostly because I'm like, well, I don't know what else to do in New York. I don't know how you get into, I'm not a stand-up. I don't know how else you get into starting to do comedy. But it turned out I really love improv. And if you really love improv, well, you start looking into the whole history of the theater and who was on the house teams and who was doing Harold Night and all this other kind of stuff, you know, for the decade that the theater existed before you were there. And like I say in the interview, the night before, I had looked up Ed and I couldn't find any real information on him. And that didn't strike me as weird. You know, a lot of TV writers, they go from college to LA and they're TV writers. And there's not much out there, really, if they don't want it to be, you know, unless they're writer-performers. So I just thought, okay, we'll peel the onion back, see what depths we can plumb with Ed. It'll be a fun little mystery. So when Ed revealed that, you know, his early days of comedy were really at UCB in its infancy, in this time that I kind of revered when I was first starting to do comedy, it really kind of like, I think I say flabbergasted me in the moment. You can kind of hear that in the second half. I think I cleaned it up a little bit so that I don't sound like too much of an idiot. But yeah, I really enjoyed talking to Ed. I hope you enjoy our conversation. Go see The Sticky right now. What else can I tell you before I go? Coming up on the show, I am doing a bunch of episodes with comic writers and artists. Coming up next week, Jason Aaron, one of my favorites. We also got, this was awesome. I looked up Tim Midyat from Silkworm, one of my favorite bands, and we had a very good talk. So look forward to those, but for now, let's talk to Ed. So wait, you're in Asheville right now. Are you from North Carolina?
No, I'm from Wisconsin originally. Lived in D.C. for college, then New York, then Chicago, then L.A. And then we got pregnant right when the pandemic hit. And my family's in Wisconsin. Her family's in Delaware, her parents. But luckily, her brother-in-law and sister-in-law and their two kids moved to Asheville like 5 years earlier. So we'd been here for like Thanksgivings and Christmases and loved it. So we were looking at, we tried to buy a house in LA, couldn't manage it, two working writers. And so we were looking at Austin, Texas, Bend, Oregon, and then Asheville, North Carolina. And the fact that the family and cousins from our little one really sealed the deal. So
yeah, the idea of like moving to a place, like it was one thing for me to move to New York to do comedy, and then LA because that's where a lot of the work was. And I knew a ton of people in all of those places. And like my family's from New York, so I even had family around there. The idea of just moving to a place that's kind of like, well, there's like some people or a few. It feels, I don't even know what adjective to put on that. Scary? I don't know.
Well, I'm probably one of the largest extroverts you've ever met, or at least my wife would say so. I immediately became what my neighbors call the mayor of our area. I have a board game night with 5 of my neighbors every 3 weeks. I was supposed to have one tonight, but it had to cancel. I like to talk to anyone all the time. So like, I just make friends wherever I go. I like to think so. Maybe I make enemies.
Yeah, I never understood that kind of. I have a friend from a long time ago who would just like strike up conversations with people on the subway. And I'm like, why are you doing that? Just read your book or listen to your podcast, put your head down or take a nap.
You and my wife would get along very well. I love traveling, and I love traveling to go meet not only the locals, I'll just strike up conversations at restaurants or bars or on the street, but also other travelers from America, sure. But I really enjoy meeting other travelers from other countries and just chatting with them in another country.
Okay, so for me, what happens is I just assume, and this is projection, obviously. I'm just like, they don't want to talk to me. And I don't mean just me, period, but I mean a stranger. That's not in you.
Well, I imagine it's less in me. Usually the people who don't want to talk to strangers make it pretty clear in the first 30 seconds, and then I don't push it. Or at least I like to think so. And then I move on.
No, I'll do. Okay, so this, I guess, is what I'm trying to get at, is that there is in you don't have that moment. Even though I don't really want to talk to someone, if they start talking to me, I'll gladly oblige. As long as they're not an asshole or like a Nazi or something like that, I'll go along with. But there's this, if I'm on the other end of that, there's always this self-doubt. There's always this moment of like, well, they don't really want to talk to me. And then that almost puts like a draw. It pulls up the drawbridge. It puts down the portcullis. Is that the thing in the castle? Right?
Yeah.
On the interaction. And I don't even start the interaction. But what I find curious is you already, like you don't have that moment of self-doubt. Or did you ever, or did you get past it?
I don't think I have much of that. I don't think I ever did. I was just very social as a kid, partly because I was once people started hitting puberty and growing up, I was a late bloomer and I didn't. So luckily I was already that way, but I became even more that way in high school and college. I was just the person who was friendly to everyone and, tried to talk to the popular kids, the not popular kids, and found, I love bridging two strangers or two people who don't have to be strangers together. And I don't know, I just enjoy it. But you know what? It's probably ego. I probably think I'm just a thrilling conversationalist, and that's probably not entirely true.
I don't know. This is enjoyable so far. It is interesting. My wife and I are I'm a writer. She's a writer and an actor and a stand-up. And a lot of the times when we meet other writers, we're like, how do you sell things? Because you seem very like low key, and knowing like what it's like to be in the room with executives who are also like maybe dead-eyed or or on a Zoom now with them pitching something. I'm like, how did you person who seems like so like unable to form a sentence in front of me, how are you able to sell a TV show? But talking to you, I'm just like, oh, it seems you're personable. Like I'm sure you joke around. Like,
yeah, I mean, honestly, not every time. When I pitch, people will say, "You're such a great pitcher," and I'm not trying to compliment myself. I'm like, how low is the bar? And they say it's quite low.
It is. By the way, you're talking to another great pitcher here.
Oh, great. Yeah. Apparently a lot of people just read monotone off a page. I'm like, yes, writing is the biggest part of the job until you sell something and have to showrun it. But like pitching is at least a third of the job. I mean, I pitch all the time because I assume nothing will sell. So you better be good at it. especially as you say, a lot of the people across the table from you can be dead-eyed. They can be uninterested on Zooms, especially in Zoom pitches. They're clearly on some other text thread or something. So you have to be you got to bring something to the pitch.
We pitched something, I guess, a year and a half ago now, and one of the networks, I could tell the person on the Zoom was doing something else. Like, you could see their eyes doing something. Like, I don't know if they were reading Wikipedia, if they were playing a game, but you could tell. And I'm just like, come on, for a half hour, you guys can't just like pretend.
In the first few months of Zoom, I think people were very conscious and like, looking at the camera or, nervous. And then like, I don't know, 6 months or a year in, people just stopped caring. Yeah, they're playing solitaire or texting about some other thing. But hey, are we doing the show now? Or?
Yeah, this is it.
Oh, okay, right.
This is it, because I'm trying to. I mean, I'll just put all my cards on the table. I'm trying to get a sense of you, and then what I'll do is let's go back to see, were you always like this? I mean, I'll just ask that blatantly. Were you always this kind of person, outgoing, open? You want to connect people together?
As far as I know, yes. My mom said early on she thought I'd become a lawyer because I love to argue things, or a psychiatrist because I love to talk to people and figure out how they tick, why they tick. And then my therapists have all chimed in over the years. My older brother had cancer when he was 4 and I was 2. And so, 9 out of 10 therapists agree that I probably, at least subconsciously, became the easy-go-lucky, let's bring everyone together, good time guy. Even as a 2-year-old, I don't remember any of that. But yeah, I think if you look at if you ask any classmate of mine that didn't hate me, they'd probably say I was always like this.
That has to be so rough, because also, like, then your brother is getting, this is so just basic Freudian type stuff, but your brother's getting all of the attention. Even if you don't, like, at 2, I don't know if I could comprehend something like that. You just know that there's, and you said you can't even remember. Like, what,
no.
At what point do you start remembering? Like, or at what point are you like, oh yeah, that's something that I can access from my own brain and not from like a lot of my early quote unquote memories are just pictures that I've seen in a photo album.
Exactly. The fake memory. You're like, I remember that green car. No, you don't. You remember the photo of it.
Yeah.
That's an actual experience of mine. There's a green car in our past. I remember, I'm sure I have earlier memories, but in this zone, I remember being in second grade with Miss Steiner. I don't remember that. And being like, it was a small class, 25 kids, but I was the funny guy. I knew that I could go over and talk to this girl, Michelle, even though everyone else thought she was mean. I was like, oh, I'll just be nice to her and we'll figure it out. So, what is that? Second grade is 7, 8? I don't know. That's as early as far back as I can go, I imagine.
What was the impulse in that moment to not just be like, well, this kid's an asshole, I'm going to stay away from her?
At the time it was assuming we can all be friends. I wasn't thinking about it as a second grader like this, but let's break down this barrier. Something is, you either have a reputation that is deserved or not. Let's get through that and let's all get along. I remember another kid, I'm not going to mention his name because it's a little sadder. He was just so mean years later. And, it was like, I think it was 4th or 5th grade. I was like, I already felt like, oh my God, what must his life be like outside of school that he's this mean? And how devastating is that? How tragic? And, I was 9 or whatever. It's just how I've always thought of people, I guess.
Yeah, because I think it's really interesting because that's very self-aware. At that time, I knew that there were friends of mine who had like maybe bad family situations. Like my house was the house where people would hang out. And so
that's a great house to have.
It's yeah, it was wonderful. And it felt good to have a community and to have like my parents welcome people in. And I just knew that like my dad would tell me this stuff like, oh, blank, his family, there's stuff going on at home and that's why he hangs out here so much. And, yeah, but like, it didn't occur to me.
That makes me, I'm tearing up right now. Just that, any kid in danger, any kid in trouble makes me very, very sad. And, even hearing that vague story makes me almost cry.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, I'm curious though, but like to me, I was like I was always this kind of like off in my brain kind of kid. And I think that's why I'm finding this interesting, is that there's this contrast here, and that you were self-aware enough to like kind of be able to read the situation in a way where I was like kind of just off in my brain. And then my dad had to tell me, it's like, no, that's why blank is here. That's why Murray. Let's go with Murray.
Yeah, Murray.
A name no child had in the 80s.
Yeah, I mean, and listen, I missed plenty of stuff. I remember a story in high school that I didn't pick up on, and a teacher told me a tragic story about a kid, and that one still haunts me. I mean, yeah, I mean, I'm not saying I was flawless. I probably was more attuned than other kids, but. And then it kind of became more of a survival skill. Not that I went to a pretty nice school in Wisconsin. It wasn't super dangerous, but I was always the little guy, the smallest kid. And so I had to use, and I saw my share of lockers and garbage cans even.
What?
Well, it made it even worse.
John Hughes film or something?
Yeah,
like
in
bullies?
7th and 8th grade. Yeah, in 7th and 8th grade. My junior high was attached to the high school, and because I was pretty good at math and Spanish, I started taking high school classes in junior high. And you know what juniors and senior hockey jocks don't like seeing in their class? A very small 7th grader doing better than them at the class. So I try and get to the class right on time, because if I was in the hallway early, these two guys would often give me guff, throw me in a trash can.
Gee, it is so like cartoony TV bullying type stuff. Like I don't actually, because this is interesting, because I've been thinking as we've been talking. I'm like, okay, so you're outgoing. So what is what is going on in your life that kind of pushes you to the side of? Because I think to want to make art or to actually do it well at any kind of level, you have to deviate from the norm. Otherwise, you would have become a lawyer, like or a psychiatrist or a psychologist or whatever, right? So what's the thing that's going to kind of like peel you off from the mass of people who kind of just, this is not a negative thing necessarily, but I think a lot of people tend to just like, oh, this is what I'm supposed to do. All right, I'll just do that. I may hate it. I may hate myself in my life, but I'm not introspective enough to look in and realize that this is why I hate, or I don't have enough moxie to do something about it.
Yeah. I mean, I have a lot of friends who have gone into careers they have no interest in. They're pretty miserable 9 to 5, or frankly, 9 to 9, or whatever it is. I have one friend who just now, he's 47, I think. He finally just stopped doing, I don't know, banking money stuff, and went back to acting, which is what he wanted to do in college. And he didn't have the support, didn't have the interest. I don't know, he had too much fear. He's just now trying to get back to acting, which is great. And so my parents were behind me and said, just, do whatever you want. I think that goes a long way. If your parents tell you you're going to be a doctor from when you're 0, you're probably going to try really hard to be a doctor no matter what. My parents were not like that. Secondly, I liked making people laugh. It's always been, maybe back to when I was 2 and my brother had cancer. I don't know. Every comedian, I think, loves laughter. It's one of the best feelings, to make somebody else laugh. And then thirdly, I spent the last 20 minutes or so saying how much I like humans, but I don't like humanity as a whole. My wife is the exact opposite. She likes humanity as a whole, thinks, art, music, all that stuff, but does not like individuals. She thinks, there's so much evil in a person. The way I cope, I guess, the way I balance out my dislike of humanity is I like finding connection with individual people. Yes, there are terrible people, but most people across the board want pretty much the same things, and that's usually, kindness and happiness. And that's why I love, traveling or even in my neighborhood, just talking to people and finding that humanity within that human. That sounds really deep, and I don't even mean it that deeply. I just, I think we do so much harm as a species, and there's so much suffering we self-inflict on each other ourselves that I think a lot of my viewpoint put me aside and said, you're going to do something artistic to say something, hopefully. I started doing improv in middle school, started my own, the first improv club at my high school, where I was the only one who showed up at the first meeting. And then I went off to college at improv, and then to New York, improv, and then stand up, and it's a little sketch. And then I started writing comedy, and here I am.
You're either a kinder person than me. I think I'm a pretty decent human being. I'm a pretty moral person, but you're either more patient, perhaps. I am trying to figure out this, because I think I'm more like your wife, where I think humanity in general is, and well, even
read honestly, the newspaper, buddy.
Honestly, in 2024, I'm starting to turn on even humanity as a concept.
There you go. You're almost there.
But I don't feel like I'm not going to dive off the cliff of nihilism just yet. But I am wondering, is this like a Midwest type thing? Is this Wisconsin? Is this your family? Like,
oh no, I'm the only one I know like me I've ever met. Everyone, I've had multiple people, including my wife, say, I thought I was the darkest person I knew until I met you, Ed. I'm also a ball of laughter, and I spend most of my days smiling and making jokes. And that's not a facade. I think a lot of the darker comedians are very depressed and make dark jokes that's not me. I mean, my life is great.
Sure.
I love my life. I'm very happy. But with this overall understanding that, I'm probably in the top 0.0001% of humans who've ever existed in their luckiness and their fortunateness and their happiness. And sorry to bring you down, but right now in my city, something terrible is happening to someone. And, in other countries, especially, I mean, America is not perfect by any means, but there are civil wars, there are terrible things happening that just always, yes, I like art and music that humans have brought, but I would trade it all in for nothing. I would trade no suffering for the higher things we've brought to this earth.
Yeah. I really have been coming to this conclusion that David Lynch is the avatar of the 21st century.
Okay, tell me more.
Blue Velvet, I've been saying that since I've been trying to describe how it feels to have this kind of like impending authoritarianism coming at us, and we're just all kind of just like going about our lives like, I guess something horrible is going to happen in January, but I don't know the shape of it exactly, or I do know the shape, and it's not great. It feels like Lost Highway to me. If you've ever seen Lost Highway, it just feels like
I have, yeah.
Yeah, that like we were Bill Pullman, we did something awful, and now we're Balthazar Getty. Like, and I don't know how to say it more than that. But like the idea in Blue Velvet, like of this ear below the ground, like this like we're all in the suburbs, but there's an ear buried underground.
Yeah,
like what that to me is like the feeling of the 21st century.
That's bleak and interesting. Yeah, my parents are very religious and very upbeat, I guess, about things. And I was not the black sheep. I was embraced. I don't know. I was always different in that way.
What denomination?
They're Roman Catholic, right down the middle, Roman Catholic, Wisconsin.
Oh, interesting.
My mom jokes that I'm not sure she was joking. My mom's first jokes and my first words were, I don't believe in God.
So, okay. So, but like, are they, because I have a lot of friends growing up that are Catholic that are just going to CCD because they have to. And I didn't get the impression that they really had any kind of faith. Is this just a kind of cultural Catholicism, even if you are going to church, or is there a kind of deeper belief going on in your family?
For my parents, it's not just a facade. They are literally knighted by the Catholic Church. There are 7 orders of the Catholic Church, and they've had swords placed on their shoulders. They do a lot of charity work. They do everything. But I was raised, with, of course, I go into church every Sunday, and the holy days of obligation, the extra few they throw at you around the year. and I was raised in that world. But to my parents' credit, we didn't have to go to Sunday school specifically, but we had confirmation. I'm not sure how familiar you are with this religion, but confirmation is when you're 12 or 15 or whatever, they ask you to make a promise, I guess, to God and to the society to become a Catholic yourself for the rest of your life. Luckily, our church, I think it was 15 or 16 instead of 12. At least you're a little older. But to my parents' credit, they said, you have to go to the classes, but you don't have to get confirmed. We don't want you making a promise that is just because we tell you to. And I respected that. And I went to the classes and I did not do it. When we had to all as a class write letters to the bishop to like ask him to come or something. But that it was the last class. And I remember my teacher saying, all right, everyone take out some pen and paper and start your letter to the bishop. Ed, here's some crayons you can draw or whatever you want to do.
Some crayons.
Yeah, I know. It felt a little infantilizing, but I guess, we were working with what we had. But, I'm proudly happy to discuss anyone's beliefs, my own included. And, that's the part of the lawyer part. My parents thought I'd be a lawyer because I argued with them about religion my whole life. Still do.
Sorry, I'm just imagining like the Pope handing you a maze on the back of like a diner placemat and be like, why don't you just go in the corner and do this?
Here's a jumble.
So how does your family, how far back do you go in Wisconsin? Like the Herros, where do you come from? How do you get there? What's going on?
My grandfather he's Lebanese. He was born in, I think he was, this is embarrassing, I don't even know this. I think he was born in Milwaukee. Either that or he came over from Lebanon very, very young. And then he had my father with his wife, and they grew up in Madison, Wisconsin, where I'm from. In fact, we grew our first house when I was super young was about 2 blocks from the school I mentioned earlier, the junior high, the grade school, junior high, and high school. And then I think when I was in 7th grade, we moved to the other side of that plot of land, the education plot, to 2 blocks on the other side to the actual house that my father grew up in. So he bought the house from the people who bought it from his father, and that's still the house they live in. So we are rooted in Wisconsin, but mostly my parents made a real push for Madison, the city.
Like, what is Madison like when you're growing up? I'm assuming we're near the same age, maybe the 80s or the 90s. Like, what is Madison like then? Madison
is and was a blue bubble in a redder state. I mean, we used to pride ourselves on being, and Bob LaFollette was one of our icons, independent-ish and generally a little more liberal leaning in Milwaukee and Madison, of course, the North, not so much. And super educated. I think there was some stat that we have more advanced degrees in our taxi drivers than any other place because it's a huge college town. And growing up, I just assumed, when you're a kid, your experience is everyone's experience. I just assumed that everyone went to a school, lived in a city with a school of 40,000 kids that, I could hear the roar of the stadium from the Wisconsin Badgers football from my house. I was a few blocks away. I sold soda there. I sold parking for those games. It's very educated. It's very liberal, or it's probably changing a little bit now. And it's very outdoorsy. There's between 2 lakes. It's cold in the winter, of course, but we have a lot of bike paths and that kind of stuff. It was pretty idyllic.
Besides this idea that you are like the idea of like being a lawyer or a psychiatrist or something like that, what is kind of like your experience of what you could be when you're a kid? I know that's a weird question, but I'm just trying to think of like, I never knew I could do what I'm doing now. I mean, forget podcasting.
This didn't exist, but yeah.
But TV writing, right?
Yeah.
I never knew that was even I knew that like I loved TV, and I didn't even know that it was I guess I didn't even think about like how it was made or what it was. So the possibility wasn't even there. And I'm kind of curious, even if it's not TV writing, like what is there? Like how do your existential desires start to develop outside of like parental, even if your parents aren't saying, they're very like, you can be whatever you want. Like my parents were great parents, but they were also like pretty adamant that I had to be something better than what they were. And they were great. Like my mom's an English teacher. She's fantastic, you know. And it took me a very long time to excavate my own desires out from under theirs. And I'm curious about like, how did yours develop?
Well, I think a lot of people whose parents, you know, I think a lot of our parents' generation made a huge step forward in parenting. You know, not that my grandparents were monsters, but like, every generation wants their children to do better. But I think our parents' generation really took a leap in that and said, you can be whatever you want, and which is huge. I mean, that was never said before in the world. But I also think it was kind of not a crutch, kind of a curse to our generation. If you can be anything you want, and that's drilled into you, and then you don't succeed in doing the thing you want, it's kind of a failure. And that is hard to accept when your parents have done everything they can so you can do whatever you want. And then it turns out you can't do whatever you want. I think that's painful. My parents were always supportive and said, you can do whatever you want. And, you know, we're not like trust fund kids, but they're like, we're always going to be here for you. You can take chances, take risks. The most important thing my mom especially drilled into us was learning to be independent. You know, she always recalled the story. She went to college, and some kid next to her the first week didn't know how to do. There was at the laundry machines, didn't know how to do laundry. And like, how do your parents send you out into the world knowing you'd have to do laundry, but not teach you how to do laundry? So, you know, we were doing our laundry ourselves, even as kids. All that to say, I think I have 3 siblings. We all were given the strength and stability to go out and try stuff, and the courage to know that if you swing and miss, you can get it back up again. You know, if you have the support system and try again. And you know, I've had a lot of jobs. You mentioned your mom was a teacher. I was a teacher. I was a bartender. I was a newspaper ad salesman. I've done all sorts of things because from the moment I saw improv comedy when I was in 6th grade, because my friend Casey's babysitter, Christy, was part of Comedy Sports in Madison, Wisconsin. We went to a practice of hers in 6th grade, and I wanted to do that forever. And I was lucky enough to find something like that. I think a lot of people don't get that. I did improv from, you know, as soon as I could from there into my late 20s, 30s, until I realized there was no money to be made. but it was still my great love. And I consider myself very fortunate that I had that. And that set me off early. I mean, people talk about gig economy now, how we're all just gig workers. I was used to that because 20 years ago, I was scraping by to do anything so I could support my habit of improv. I was at the UCB in New York doing improv something 7 days a week when I was 22, 24. I had a day job to pay the bills at an advertising agency, and then either practiced, performed, or interned at the theater every night. And then usually went out and drank at McManus.
Yes, wait, Ed, what? Sorry. I'm like, did we not cross paths in New York? When were you at UCB?
2000. Yeah, I think I'm older than you. 2000 to, I don't know, 2010 or 12 or something. I'm probably doing the math wrong.
We just missed each other. So you're like, you're the same like Betsy and Ari and Manzukis and all those guys.
Yeah,
okay.
I mean they were the successful ones. Even I mean, I had a group with Nick Kroll, John Mulaney, Mike Birbiglia, who all went to college together, and we went up and did Little Man. We were the first outside group, non-house team to perform on Herro night and in the cage match. Was cage match still a thing when you were there?
Yeah,
I was also the first person to compete against myself in cage match because Little Man had won the outside group, and then my house team came around, and I had to perform in both. I was playing both ways.
Sorry, I tried Googling you to find information about you. None of this came up.
I scrubbed everything I possibly can from my previous comedy days. I used to be, then I was a stand-up, and I went to every place that had my stand-up online and asked them to take me down years ago.
This is insane.
Not because I'm trying to like cleanse myself. I hate seeing myself on camera. I hate pictures of myself. And I didn't want my old stale jokes to be online forever.
I was going to make a quote joke. When you were like, oh yeah, I went to DC. I'm like, oh, were you like Mulaney and Kroll's class? And you're like, yeah, literally I was.
Yeah. I was the director of the improv group I had Birbiglia and Kroll. Alison Becker is an actress. She was there. James Murray of Impractical Jokers. He was in that group. He was a year above me.
Okay. So
surprises for you too, then.
You get the comedy bug. And this is, I think this is what's interesting. You have comedy sports where you can channel this, and also it gives you a guidepost. You're like, oh, people do this.
Yeah. Sorry to jump in. I go to comedy sports Friday and Saturday every night in high school, so much that I knew them all and they knew me, blah, blah, blah. And there's a game called Chain Death Murder, I think it is. You send an audience member out. My last show before I was leaving for college, I volunteered to be the volunteer. Go outside the room with the other players. And this guy, Joe, and this other guy named Chris, I'm like, guys, this is my last show here. I'm going to college. How do I make this my living? And they both started laughing and saying, Ed, we do this for beer money. We don't make any money at this. And it really shook me because I had spent 4 or more years thinking, this is the path. And in one instant, they said, no, there is no path here. Luckily, UCB then jumped up and made it more of a path. But, and Mantzoukas has made money, a living, but not from the improv shows. It's, from what the improv shows catapult him to.
No, I'm sure Dinosaur Improv, the stuff they're doing now at Largo is, I mean, my wife's done shows at Largo. It's, it's nice, but it's not going to pay your mortgage. It's not going to, yeah. So,
sorry, I cut you off.
No. I'm just, I'm sorry. I'm like a little flabbergasted because it seems to me that you had this North Star early on and then you just decided to follow it. Is that correct?
Yeah. I mean, for all reasonable intents and purposes, yes.
Do you know, and I don't know if this is answerable or if you possibly could, before your brother got sick, were your parents more conservative in terms of what they wanted for their kids?
That's a very good question. I don't even know if they'd be able to answer. I mean, he was 4 when it happened, so it'd be tough to say. But they were adventurous. I mean, when they got married, they immediately went to Argentina and lived there for they tried to do it for a year. They were stuck down there because a revolution happened. But
wait,
that
was it Argentina in like the 70s? Or when was that? Yeah,
in the 70s. Yeah, they got married right before my dad had a fellowship to go down there, and so they rushed the wedding, rushed the marriage, but they crammed the wedding in before so they could both go together. And that wasn't insane, but that was definitely not what every white boy in Wisconsin was doing. So I don't think my mom, they're both lawyers. My mom got a law degree when, yes, there were some female lawyers, but it was not the standard. My grandmother on her side, her mother got a college education. Like they pushed the boundaries in their own ways, I think. But yeah, I don't know how they felt about their kids at the time.
Were your grandparents, again, I don't know how you would know this or if you do, but do you think they were open to their kids experimenting? Do you think it was just the time, the 60s and the 70s? Like, what made your parents? Because I guess the stereotype of the Midwest that I have is, Midwest nice, and you just kind of like stay in your lane and you don't do much else. Yeah,
I mean, in many ways they are that. My mom's from Indiana, so still the Midwest. They're very Midwest pleasant, and if they ever hear this, I think they would agree. They probably won't hear this, but they might. They're very supportive. But they put on a nice, pleasant show, but they still do things. And I think in general, they were not seen as black sheep by their parents. So I'm guessing their parents were supportive at least for their generation standards. I mean, yeah, you can't do crazy things that your parents don't endorse and then still have, at least what I believe, the relationships they had with them. I mean, they weren't like, screw my parents, I'm going to go off and be somewhat unconventional. So I assume my parents had a similar sense from that I have from my parents.
Yeah. So they go to Argentina. There's a revolution. You said they got stuck there?
Yeah. My mom's dad, my grandpa, who I was named after, died while they were down there. And they tried to get home for the funeral. And they couldn't. The airports were closed. My dad's fellowship, a Rotary fellowship, I believe. Oh, no, it wasn't a Rotary. It was a school thing. It shut down, too. I mean, the school, everything shut down. And so they were just kind of there, not being able to do what they were there for, not being able to get home, kind of just scraping by, which, at least for me, I don't ever think of my parents as like young and out of control, not out of control like crazy, but like not in control of like the situation. They're just very stable people. But, they were 25 in a foreign country being escorted out of an airport like with guns. I mean, that still sticks with me. They were also young and not sure what they were doing. I think that's great.
Yeah. I mean, at 25, I was in grad school. I don't even know what I would have I don't know how I would have even handled that. The fact that they had, I think that's the thing where like, when I think about the future here in America, I'm like, I was not built for violence. I was built in a time where like things were very relatively pleasant.
Yeah. We've had it pretty easy for pretty long. And, if America does fall, we had a decent run. We were the global leader since about World War II. You could argue maybe World War I. And, Rome lasted longer, but empires fall when people stop knowing how lucky they are and what they fought for. Vietnam, the average age of a soldier was 17 or 18. World War II, my grandpa lied about his age to go fight the Nazis. That is a clear path and a clear conscience. And I'm not saying people haven't suffered and people haven't gone to war for us, but our generation, it is just much more removed and we take a lot of things for granted. And, we've did this in education. We don't care about educating our populace. I don't know why. And so not only civics, basic human American civics. So I don't know, kindness and purpose.
Yeah.
Boy, that got really dark and grim for us. Sorry. Let's go back to this common sport.
Well, look, I ping pong dialectically between despair and joy at a rate that is imperceptible to the human eye at this point. So it's just... But it just feels ominous, and then this is why I keep referring to David Lynch, where I'm just like, it feels ominous, but also like the sun's out, my dog's sleeping right there next to me, I'm having a nice conversation with someone. It doesn't. Yeah. Okay, so your parents come back. When did they start a family?
Soon after. Let me do the math. I think 3 years after they got married. They were in Argentina right away. They came back. My brother was born in 1975.
Are you the second oldest?
Second of four, yep.
Because you were saying when your brother got sick, how long was the treatment for?
Again, I don't know specifics. He got chemotherapy, he lost his hair. I would put it at about a year. I don't know. I'm just judging by the family photos. He was, losing hair bald for, in my mind, about a grade. But I don't actually know the answer, which is actually a little weird that I should probably know that answer.
No, I'm just curious, you talking about like this kind of, again, there's this, I fall back on like easy kind of like armchair psychoanalysis a lot, but like it
Sure.
does seem to be that like, if you grow up in a family where there had been this kind of like very traumatic illness early on in the family, that it might push you in a certain direction of like you said earlier, I'm going to be the upbeat one. And I don't even mean that like you made a conscious decision.
Right.
It's almost like you seem like a very empathetic person. And so I think naturally you would want to, it's the same thing like most of my friends are on Lexapro. And so I naturally kind of become the person who is like, I'm trying to cheer everyone up and like, hey, the sun's out, whatever, the dog's sleeping. It's not that bad. As you get older, how does that sense develop in you?
The empathy make people
Yeah,
joyful.
I could see it as this early pressure on you, but like, what is keeping you? Why stay on that path? Or what is in your life where you're like, is it just like, I mean, I have this void in me where like, it's very nice to make people laugh because then it fills up the void for a little while, and I can pretend like, it's, I'm a whole person, but like, but do you know what I mean? Does that make any sense?
Yeah. Yeah. It makes a lot of sense. The key for me was, first finding my wife and, want to bring joy to her. And then we had a baby 4 years ago, and it's a cliche, but
how does that develop? That feeling of, well, I want to make people laugh outside of just like, it feels good to make people laugh.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you meant how do I hold on to it? And, it was waning before that. How do I develop it? Yeah. I mean, at first it felt good. I got positive reinforcement in numerative ways. And then it becomes just a part of you. It's not like a tick or anything, but like it is in a way. Like it is very hard for me to have serious conversations without putting in jokes. And that's annoying to my wife and other people sometimes, but it's part of my lizard brain now. It's like, it's been there so long, but I think it developed in the same way that it started. Girls liked me when I was funnier.
Yeah.
And I liked girls. I made friends because I was funny. I got all the things socially and in other ways from that. I also, I was good in school, but like I didn't get the same joy out of an A on a paper that I did as, a great joke or, silly sketch. And much like a cult, and I'm not saying comedy is a cult, but like anything that you build your society around and your social network around, like to my credit, quote unquote, just like in fifth grade when I was trying to bridge friends who would never, I loved my birthday parties at the time because I would invite people who'd never really hang out before and realize, they're not so bad. Same with college. Like I had the jock friends. I lived with kind of like the jockier people, I guess. They'd probably laugh if I called them jocks. But my other friends were the comedy people. And I mean, just like I was doing 7 nights of improv in college and after college, I had nothing to do but improv in college. So it was me and 8 people doing everything together, going to movies, doing improv practice, doing shows, hanging out. It's like every friendship circle, except instead of proximity or a sport, it was comedy. And I've never thought about it until just now, but to leave that would have been it would be like leaving a cult because you'd break those ties. And as we got older, some of those people did. Some of my good friends, of course, didn't pursue a career in comedy or showbiz. And yes, they're some of my friends, but like they're not doing the same thing every day like us. So it becomes a self-feeding machine to make people laugh in that way, societally, at least socially.
Yeah. And it seems like also like from an early age, you felt camaraderie with people. And so it seems natural that you would gravitate towards comedy, especially improv, where that is like a fundamental part of doing it. Group mind is the building block of it.
Building relationships on and off stage, either for 3 minutes or for 30 years.
Yeah. Yeah. So then at what point do you think it went from an obsession to something where you're like, is there a way I can professionalize this?
It must have been in my mid to late 20s when I started thinking, wait, there's no one making any real money off of this yet. Amy hadn't gotten to SNL yet. They had a theater, but it was a dingy theater. I'm not sure if you were at the original one or no. You're probably at the newer one.
No, Chelsea. 26th Street.
That's a much nicer theater. And so, we were all the 5 of us or whatever in that group were, trying to do commercial auditions, and Mike started doing stand up first, and he said, "There's no money in improv. Come do stand up with me." And I really don't actually even like stand up. I enjoy Mike and Nick and John, and if the greats, of course, but watching stand up and especially doing stand up to me just feels so rehearsed, because a lot of stand-ups pretend they're thinking about it in the moment or laughing at themselves, and it's all a little phony. And again, if any stand-up hears this, please don't take offense. It's just for my standards, my tastes, I don't like it, especially when I came from improv, when everything is in the moment and ephemeral and it goes away. Like, I like that part. And stand-up is the opposite. You hone something over and over and try and keep it sounding fresh, even though it's not. And so I did it. And listen, I'm not as good as Mike, John, or Nick at stand-up. I just know it. But my heart wasn't in it. Mike always wanted to be a stand-up, even in early college. Like, that was his dream. That's all he wanted to do. And that helps, because then he would forego social or academics to go, sweep up and bust at the DC Improv. That was never in me. So I had to find something else. I was technically, surviving touring from Chicago as a stand-up for a little bit. But then by, luck, social networks, one of the guys in the group, Brian Donovan, he was still in New York, and he got a job writing on a radio show for NPR, actually Public Radio International, but it aired on NPR. It was kind of like the Daily Show for NPR, news and music and comedy. And I was married to my first wife at the time, and it was not going great. And he said, "Come back to New York and write." And I'd never written before. I mean, again, I like improv, but it paid and had benefits. So I went back to New York and did that. And that was the first time I started writing comedy, and it paid.
Yeah. I mean, I get all of this. Once I figure out a joke, I'm like, great. Like, that's why I don't like I don't like doing stand-up. I love watching stand-up, but I don't like doing stand-up because I've only tried it like once or twice. But like, I'm like, all right, that joke worked. I don't need to do it anymore. Like, whereas I watch my wife, like, how do I make this funny again? Like, I know it's funny, but how do I like infuse it with life again? And
making it funnier over and over at doing different sets, changing one word or stressing something else. It's all fascinating on a linguistic and sociological level. It's just not what makes me buzz.
Yeah, exactly. I want to figure out the thing in the moment, as opposed to have it there, then figure out how to act as if I am figuring out in the moment. So, okay. So I get you on that level. And I also get I think there's this component here, and we don't talk about it a lot in public, but like, of class, right? Where like, I didn't come from money. And so I had to figure out what to do to survive. I mean, my first years in New York were like just scraping by. It was not good. I didn't realize this until later, but like, I'm like, why are my friends like, they seem to be able to write all day. And then I learned later,
I wonder why.
Oh, they have family money. They don't actually have to they don't have to go to a terrible office in Midtown and be screamed at by a lunatic for 8 hours.
Yeah.
And I think that stuff does push you in certain directions of like what you're going to do with, especially like improv. You can't really make money. Maybe Ben Schwartz is maybe the only person who's made money on improv. I don't know any, and I guess
Middleditch with them.
Yeah, I was going to say, didn't they do that Netflix thing? But like, I didn't know that TV was a thing you could do. But then once I found out it was a thing you could do and that a thing you could make a living on, I'm like, oh, okay, obviously that's the direction. And also, I don't know, it just fits me. And I'm curious, we're right at the very end. Do you think outside of like the class things that are pushing you in a certain direction, do you think it fits you in a certain way? Or do you think it's like, well, I like it and I can make a living on it?
TV writing?
Yeah.
Oh, it fits me completely. I mean, if any writer is listening to this, just starting off, don't get into writing unless you have to do it. Like, it's miserable. I mean, the highs are good, but like, it's so hard, and it's not a meritocracy, and it's not easy. So please go do something else if you can. I've had like 20 jobs, and I could go back to advertising or teaching or product development or newspaper ad sales, I guess, but they don't spark anything in me, which is, a lot of my friends back home, I go back home fairly off, not fairly off. Sometimes I go back once a year for a large board game weekend with my best oldest friends, and I just say, "So what's new with you guys? Like, how's work?" And they're like, "Oh, work's work," and they move on. And I respect that so much. They compartmentalize work into a 9 to 5 cubicle there or whatever. All I think about is work, really, in some form or another. All my entertainment, I'm watching critically. I'm always thinking of 4 different projects in my head. I can't turn it off. And in my younger days, I was also there. Like, I loved picking up a hobby and quote unquote mastering it, and then moving on. Like in high school, I did yo-yos for 6 months, got amazing at them, learned all the tricks. Then I went to like devil sticks and a Diablo thing with 2 strings, just like weird little things. And then when I was done, I moved on. And that's also helpful in advertising. You do a project for a couple of months, you do the ad, and you move on. Same with product development. I helped, with true example, but if Coke's like, we need a new flavor, what should we do? Like, we help them like come up with a new thing. And then you move on. You research it a lot and you move on. And that's what writing for me is. Not so much in like, a network comedy. It's pretty much just write jokes. But like the shows I like doing, researching of my own. I mean, I just read, I'll just show you. I have hundreds of books. There's a 1,000-page book there I just read to consider pitching on something. Like I read a nonfiction book to see if that's something I want to do. And it's great. That fits me like a glove.
Ed, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you.
This is an absolute delight.
I really enjoyed it.
And we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye, oh, bye, oh, bye, oh, bye, oh, bye, oh, bye, oh,